England has over 1,500 castles. Most are entry fees and gift shops, but a small number are someone's home right now, this morning, with a kettle on and a car in the drive and a mortgage on a building that was standing when Henry V was still alive. This video covers 10 English castles still privately occupied, built before 1700, ranked from remarkable to almost impossible to believe. By entry 1, the idea that a castle needs to be empty to be historic is going to feel like something you were told but never questioned. 1. Sizergh Castle, Cumbria, near Kendal. The Strickland family built the Pele Tower in 1340 and lived there continuously until 1950 when they handed it to the National Trust, but retained the right to live in the private wing, which they still do. Pele Towers were fortified houses built along the Scottish-English border during centuries of raids. They were homes with battlements, not castles with kitchens. Sizergh is one of the finest examples. The Great Hall dates to the 14th century. The Elizabethan staterooms are some of the finest in northern England. The trade-off: the Stricklands gave it away after 610 years, but didn't leave. They negotiated a lease to stay in part of the building. They no longer own it outright, but they're also no longer solely responsible for a multi-million-pound maintenance burden. Your family has lived here since before the Black Death. You now technically live inside a charity. 2. Raby Castle, County Durham. Built by the Neville family in the 14th century, mostly the 1360s through 1380s, 9 medieval towers. A kitchen built to feed an army, still structurally intact with massive fireplaces and vaulted ceilings. The Nevilles used Raby as headquarters for the Rising of the North in 1569, a Catholic rebellion against Elizabeth I. They lost. The crown seized the castle. The family that organized the revolt lost everything. The family living there now, Lord Barnard's line, the Vanes, has held it since 1626. 400 years. They weren't the builders, they were the replacements after someone else's treason. The castle outlived the bloodline that built it and moved on to the next. Lord Barnard still lives in private apartments. The rest opens for tours, weddings, events. The medieval kitchen you can visit was designed to serve a household that could raise an army. Now it's a venue hire. The castle doesn't care who holds it, it just stands, free. Powys Castle, on the Welsh border, built by Welsh princes in the 13th century, passed to the Herbert family, Earls of Powys, in the 1580s during England's consolidation of Wales. They still live in the private apartments. The National Trust owns the building. The lead-lined roof is original medieval construction, one of the very few surviving examples in Britain. The terraced Baroque gardens, carved into the hillside in the late 17th century by the first Marquess of Powys after he returned from exile in France, are considered the finest of their kind in the country. Someone from the Herbert family wakes up looking at that view every morning. The castle changed hands during wars. It survived the Reformation. It outlasted the family that built it. The current residents gave it to a preservation trust, but kept a wing for themselves. The trade-off plays out the same way it did at Sizergh. You stay, but you no longer own what your ancestors built. The roof that's kept rain out since the 1200s is now someone else's legal responsibility. You live in the history. The charity owns it. 4. Lumley Castle, County Durham. Sir Ralph Lumley built it in 1392. He was executed for treason 8 years later, caught up in a plot against Henry IV. The family nearly lost the castle, but held on through legal maneuvering and marriage alliances. The ghost of Lily of Lumley has been reported for centuries. According to the story, priests threw her down a well in the 15th century after she refused to convert to Catholicism. The family lived with that story for 600 years. Now it's a selling point. Lumley operates as a luxury hotel. The Earl of Scarborough, descendant of the Lumley line through marriage, retains private quarters. Your ancestral home is now someone's wedding venue. Your family ghost is on TripAdvisor. The murder story that haunted your ancestors for generations is now part of the marketing copy. The trade-off isn't just financial, it's that the thing your family whispered about in private is now what strangers pay to hear. About over dinner, the castle survives by selling the grief it witnessed. 5. Belvoir Castle, Leicestershire. The Dukes of Rutland have held Belvoir since 1508. The current Duke and Duchess still live in the private wing. They've opened 30 rooms to the public. The Great Hall hosts weddings. There's a farm shop at the gate. Belvoir has its own regiment, the Belvoir Volunteers. It's ceremonial now, but the tradition echoes the days when a duke could raise a private army from his estate. The castle sits on Norman foundations, though the current structure is largely 19th century after a fire. The family never left the site. The Duchess has spoken publicly about the financial burden. Maintaining a castle this size costs a fortune most families don't have anymore. What they have is the castle. You can't sell it. You can't afford it on inherited wealth alone, so you diversify. The trade-off is complete. You're a duke. You have a private militia tradition. You also rent out your ballroom to strangers so you can pay for the roof. Your feudal aristocracy and the wedding venue operator at the same time. The castle doesn't care about the contradiction. It just needs funding to stay standing. 6. Arundel Castle, West Sussex, built in 1068, the year after the conquest. Roger de Montgomery razed the motte. The stone castle followed in the 11th and 12th centuries. The Fitzalan-Howard family, Dukes of Norfolk, has held it since 1556, still their primary residence. The Duke of Norfolk is also the Earl Marshal of England. That's the hereditary office responsible for organizing coronations, state funerals, royal ceremonies. The current Duke, Edward Fitzalan-Howard, 18th Duke, organized the funeral of Elizabeth II and the coronation of Charles III. The person who planned the coronation of the current king lives in a castle built before the Domesday Book was written, parts open to the public seasonally. The private apartments stay closed. The Duke works from a building older than the country he serves in ceremonial capacity. The trade-off isn't about money here, it's about obligation. You can't retire from being Earl Marshal. The role is hereditary. Your job is continuity itself, ensuring the monarchy's rituals are performed correctly in the right order with the right precedence. Your office is a Norman fortress. You were born into both. The castle is the job is the inheritance. You don't leave. 7. Hever Castle, Kent. Anne Boleyn grew up here. Henry VIII visited repeatedly in the 1520s while courting her. She became queen in 1533, executed in 1536. Henry gave Hever to his fourth wife, Anne of Cleves, as part of their divorce settlement in 1540. The castle passed through multiple hands. By 1903, it was a ruin, roof collapsing, walls crumbling. Then William Waldorf Astor, an American millionaire, bought it and restored it stone by stone. He built an entire Tudor village alongside it to house guests because the original castle was too small for entertaining. His descendants, through the Guthrie family, still own part of the estate and live there. The castle operates as a tourist attraction. The building where the English Reformation began, where Henry VIII decided he wanted a divorce badly enough to break with Rome, is now privately owned by the heirs of a New York financier. The British couldn't afford to save their own heritage. American money did. The irony is permanent and uncomfortable. The country that declared independence from the crown in 1776 now owns a piece of the crown's origin story. The same rooms where Henry courted the woman who would change English history forever are someone's home because a foreign fortune intervened when England's ran out. 8. Leeds Castle, Kent, built in 857 AD, remodeled in stone in the 12th century on 2 islands in a lake. 6 medieval queens of England lived here: Eleanor of Castile, Margaret of France, Isabella of France. Lord Conway called it the loveliest castle in the world. The last private owner was Lady Bailey. When she died in 1974, she left Leeds Castle to a charitable foundation with one instruction: it would never be sold or broken up. No one lives there now in the conventional sense, but the foundation employs full-time staff. The building hosts events, conferences, weddings. It has never been empty. Human presence inside these walls goes back over 1,000 years without interruption. The trade-off here is different. Lady Bailey understood, something the other families are still learning. The castle had become bigger than any bloodline could contain, too historically significant, too expensive, too important to let one family's fortune decide its fate. So she gave it institutional immortality instead. The building that housed queens, that survived the Norman conquest and the Wars of the Roses and the Reformation, now survives through bureaucracy. It's occupied by a foundation instead of descendants. The castle chose what it was. It decided it would outlive private ownership entirely. Leeds doesn't belong to a family anymore. It belongs to itself. The foundation just maintains it. The longest running trade-off of all, to preserve it, they had to stop living in it. 9. Windsor Castle, Berkshire. Built by William the Conqueror after 1066 as part of a defensive ring around London, continuously occupied by every English and British monarch since. Nearly 1,000 years without interruption. The oldest and largest occupied castle in the world. King Charles III uses it as his primary weekend residence. The same building that was a military stronghold during the Norman conquest is where the current king has breakfast on a Saturday morning. Every monarch since William I has slept inside these walls. The round tower is Norman. The state apartments are Baroque and Georgian. St. George's Chapel holds the graves of kings and queens going back centuries. The private apartments, where the king actually lives, sit alongside rooms that host state banquets and diplomatic receptions. Windsor is the proof that breaks the whole idea open. Because if you can accept that the King of England lives in a Norman fortress, you have to accept that castle and home were never opposites. We just forgot that for a few centuries when we stopped building them. The monarchy never stopped. They're not pretending. They're not performing historical reenactment. They're living in the same structure their ancestors used for the same purpose: projection of power, continuity of bloodline, a permanent physical claim to authority. The trade-off doesn't apply here the way it does to the other families. The king doesn't rent out the state apartments for weddings. He doesn't hand it to the National Trust. Windsor is still what it always was, a working seat of power that happens to be 1,000 years old. The building that commanded the Norman military occupation of England now hosts the same family that claimed descent from those occupiers. The fortress still functions. It just swapped swords for ceremony and sieges for state visits. The walls don't care. They were built to last. 10. Berkeley Castle, Gloucestershire. Built in 1067. The Berkeley family has held it since 1153, over 870 years by the same family. They still live there. It is still their home. William Fitz-Osborne, one of William the Conqueror's key commanders, raised the original structure. The Berkeleys took it 30 years before the Magna Carta was signed, 24 generations minimum. No one alive in that family chose this. They were born into it. Edward II was murdered here in 1327. Deposed by his wife, Isabella, and her lover Roger Mortimer, the king was held prisoner at Berkeley and died under circumstances historians still argue about. The cell where he was imprisoned is still intact. Tourists pay to see it. The current Mr. and Mrs. Berkeley live upstairs. The murder room is part of the tour. The same family that may have enabled, witnessed, or at minimum hosted the killing of a monarch still sleeps in the private wing. You can't renovate it. You can't ignore it. It's a load-bearing atrocity. The castle's entire identity is tied to the fact that a king died inside it. The family has been living with that story for 870 years, longer than the United States has existed, longer than England has been Protestant. The argument about what happened in that room predates the printing press. Your ancestors made a decision in 1153 that you're still living with in 2025. The trade-off is absolute. Your home is where a king was killed. Historians write papers about it. Tourists stand in the room and imagine it. Your family has been living 100 yards from that room the entire time, and they show no sign of leaving. These aren't fairy tales. These are families who traded normal life for continuity, privacy for preservation, autonomy for identity. The castle chose them as much as they chose it. The Stricklands live. Inside a charity. The Berkeleys live above a murder room. The Duke of Norfolk can't retire because his job is hereditary ceremony and his office is a Norman fortress. Hever Castle survived because American money saved what British money couldn't. Leeds Castle became too important for any family to hold, so it doesn't belong to anyone anymore. It belongs to itself. What you're looking at when you see these buildings isn't heritage, it's obligation that outlived the people who took it on. The original builders are centuries dead. The current residents inherited a choice someone else made when the Plantagenets were still on the throne. You don't buy a castle, you're born into one, and once you're in, you can't leave without being the generation that broke a line that survived the Black Death, the Reformation, the Civil War, 2 World Wars, and the invention of the internet. The guilt of ending it is worse than the cost of keeping it. The trade-off is this: you get to live in a building that predates the discovery of America. You get a postal address that appears in history books. You get the knowledge that your bloodline held something continuous while entire nations rose and fell around it. And in exchange, your home is also someone else's wedding venue. Your bedroom wing is private, but 50,000 strangers walked through your dining room last year. You own £50 million in stone and can't sell it. The roof costs $2 million to repair. Your family ghost is on TripAdvisor. If you're thinking of relocating in the UK, chances are you won't end up in a Norman fortress with a regicide in the basement. But now you know what's possible when inheritance becomes imprisonment, when home becomes history you can't escape, and when the thing your ancestors built decides it's going to outlive you whether you like it or not. The castles are still standing. The families are still there, and every morning they wake up and put the kettle on, because what else are you supposed to do when your ancestors made a decision in 1153 that you're still living with in 2025?